AI happens pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, it might just pass you by.
Hello and welcome to The Reasoning Show. I'm your host, Brian Gracely, and today I've got reason to think that it's important for us to not only dig into how enterprises are adopting AI, as the kind of focus of the show has been, but also what's going on in the startup space. What are those companies that are really probably very much AI native learning from their adoption, from their learning curve, and things that, potentially become competitive threats to larger enterprises. And so we're going to dig into that with longtime friend of the show, Sam Ramji, right after the break. Today's show is sponsored by Nasuni. There's a growing gap in AI right now between what's possible in theory and what successfully works at scale inside an enterprise. The difference comes down to unstructured file data. Many AI initiatives struggle because the file data they depend on is scattered, unstructured, and disconnected from where and how work actually happens. Nasuni changes that. It brings your unstructured file data into a single, secure foundation so AI, both generative and agentic, can access it with the context, governance, and performance it needs in production. Bring AI to where your unstructured data lives. See what it takes to activate your data for AI and request a demo at nasuni.com/AI. Today's show is sponsored by ShareGate. You're out of time. Copilot needs to be deployed ASAP, but your tenant really isn't ready for it. Years of data, permissions, and users lurk in its shadows, ready to be exposed by AI. ShareGate Protect sees it all, so you can find the exposure risks, fix them fast, and deploy AI with confidence. Microsoft 365 Governance, they've got this. Learn more at sharegate.com/protect. And we're back, and I am very, very excited for today's show because we are going to not only reconnect with an old friend of the show, but we're also going to kind of dig into very much a mindset and a trend that's happening. And it's very AI centric, but we're going to dig into it today with a good friend of the show, longtime friend of the show, Sam Ramji, CEO and co-founder of Sailplane, a new company that is still somewhat stealth. I don't know that we're going to dive into it too much, but Sam, great to have you back on the show. Great to be talking to you again.
Brian, it's amazing to see you again. So good to see you.
We just real quick for folks who, somehow, may not know your background because you've been doing big things for a long time at a lot of places. Give folks just a little bit of background. You don't have to go back for the whole thing. And then ultimately kind of what got you wanting to get back in the startup space, where you're at right now.
Sure. Super short version. Got a degree in artificial intelligence and neuroscience at UC San Diego in 94. Nobody cared about AI at the time, so I became a software engineer and did that for several years. Eventually, I made my way to Microsoft, where a pretty awesome visionary named Bill Hilf was leading open source on Linux. He had left IBM, where he was responsible for a lot of the Linux technical marketing, Linux market strategy. And he decided to go work for Bill Gates on Linux, which is crazy. And I wrote a Think Week paper internally saying Microsoft should really embrace Linux and open source. And it was well enough founded that Bill Gates sent it to Bill Hilf, and Bill Hilf called me, and the rest turned into a half a decade at Microsoft in the late 2000s, transforming how the company thought about and worked with open source. Then I built open APIs, worked at Apogee, Cloud Foundry, and Google, trying to make larger and larger open source ecosystems and open scaling data systems. And in 2023, I reconnected with ex-Googler, and we felt like the game was afoot.
Yeah.
ChatGPT had come out, GPT-4 had come out. It seemed like everything that you ever dreamed about doing with AI was suddenly under your fingertips. But the only way to build what you wanted was to just jump off the cliff, right? You couldn't do this incubating in some other company. I was working for a database company that also focuses on open source, recently acquired by IBM. So, just got to abandon everything comfortable. Discomfort is, I think, your best key metric for learning.
Yeah.
If you're really comfortable, probably not learning that much.
Right,
so
exactly.
Francisco Uribe and I just joined forces and created a AI company based on the idea of eliminating toil for people in technical AI operations. The rest is just learning a mile a minute.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's awesome. I know you're always on my list of people that I'm like, what's he working on? And the thing that jumped out of me a couple of weeks ago, and we will have to come back and do a show on Sailplane, and we'll get into all the details. Still a little bit of time before we dig into that. But for some reason, a couple of weeks ago, I was scrolling through LinkedIn for some reason, And you had put a post on there that was called Halt and Retool. And it was kind of talking about how you guys had a little bit of an epiphany moment about you were beginning to ship some features or you had created some new stuff. And it was very much around this idea that not only the way that it was created was through AI, but you really needed to kind of use that as an example setter for the rest of the company. And so I wonder if you could kind of walk through the experience, because then you then went and sort of documented it and kind of built out a structure around it. But kind of give us the starting point of where that thing came from.
Yeah, well, my co-founder is just nonstop developer, right? He's got an incredible AI background. Worked at Google Brain for almost a decade. Built part of what's now Google Vertex, and he's an inveterate builder. So you can't be super into AI and not use AI to build your thing.
Right.
So he's been doing that. And I think we just kind of accepted like, oh, that's good. Everybody on the team's using AI. Francisco's using AI to build everything. We've got a tiny but mighty team. As of January, we were 6 people and running super hard to build production grade features for our customers. We had a conversation when Opus 4.6 came out, which was kind of a state change as far as we could see for speed of what everyone was able to deliver. And then we started seeing, wow, there's some incredible speed gains that just happened within a week or two. And the big challenge is, can you afford to be in a software company at any level and not be at the frontier of agent native coding? And we looked at each other and decided like, no, we cannot. So he took it on himself to go as hard as he could, right? Just, sort of every day, every night, every weekend, just binding a deeper and deeper harness that fit him better and better. Mm-hmm. And you could see it in the GitHub statistics, right? Just the total lines of code, the PRs merged. We could feel it in the velocity of the product. It was getting better. And then there was this moment in the middle of February where he demoed something for me. It was a completely new interface and screen for how we show what's actually happening in our customer environments. Kind of bowled over. I was like, how long did this take you? He said, actually, I built it in one day. And he gave his trademark laugh. And I was like, all right, well, that's awesome. When are we going to put it in production? He said, it's already in production. Yeah. I just thought, oh my God, what just changed? Right? Stop the press, because there's so much toil at every step in the normal software development cycle for anybody, no matter how skilled, how visionary, how careful, how procedural you are. There's so much toil and there's so many links in the chain, from the initial ideation to being able to play around with the first prototypes to see if it meets your expectations, to aligning it to your data model. Do you need to change the schema? Okay, how are you going to do the data migration if you have to upgrade the schema? Tying into logging and telemetry and like all of the things that all of us know about a production SDLC. And I was like, you speed ran that? Okay, we just got to stop and talk about how you did it. Yep. And so he walked me through it. He expressed the inspirations of OpenAI and Anthropic's harness engineering blogs, some of the frameworks that were available that he looked at. He ended up building his own. And there was no way that I could feel at that moment that something powerful had changed. Or I should say, there's no way I could miss the feeling that something powerful had changed. And we were a 6-person team. And we were starting to hire, right? We had our first, second, third ever hires after our founding team coming up. Yep. I thought, can I actually afford to hire people if we haven't standardized how we do software engineering at the frontier of agent native coding? And I said we could not. So we stopped the whole company a week later. And, as you mentioned, I posted about it. So I'll, answer any questions that you may have, or anything longitudinal. But it was just that moment. There's multiple measurements in physics of the movement of a particle. One is its change in position is velocity. Its change of velocity is acceleration. You can feel that, like it's how many g-forces. But there's an acceleration of the acceleration. There's no common word for it, but one, believe it or not, technical term is jerk, right? And that's that feeling you get on a roller coaster when the acceleration of the acceleration is changing. You're suddenly like banged forward. Yeah. That was my feeling in that moment in the middle of February. Like the world just jerked and we better jerk with it.
There was a few things that, when I was reading that, it jumped out at me for a couple of reasons. And I'll sort of start at the company level. You talked about, I've got to, retrain everybody, or kind of first and foremost sort of expose them to what this is. And I think we've had a couple of shows on this. I've had a chance to talk to a few different people who have been sort of all in on this. How did you find that kind of exposing people to this is sort of the other side of the fence when you're kind of all in on this thing, what it looks like. What was the rest of their reaction? Was it as obvious to them? Was there a certain amount of like, this is black magic, I don't necessarily need to do that, but like what was their kind of initial reaction?
The first initial reaction, I think this is a thing you always have to look out for as an engineering leader, is I'm already doing this, right? It's like I'm using Claude Code. We're doing agentic-based coding. Okay, great. But how do I really get you to pay attention to what has changed? Well, you have to create the space for people to listen. People are awesome, right? Like I'm incredibly grateful for my team. I've been incredibly grateful, I think, for every engineering team I've led. They are cranking, they're solving problems in high dimensional spaces, and they're doing it as efficiently as they believe is possible. Mm-hmm. Like nobody's sitting around slacking. So how do you interrupt their attention? It has to be something a little shocking. So the most shocking thing that you could do is as a team leader is to say, we're going to stop working.
Yeah.
And so that's a technique I'd advocate for anybody else to use in order to get the full physical head to toe attention of their engineering team. Like, we're going to stop working.
Yeah.
Wait, what happened?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's got a little bit of the old Gene Kim kind of like pull the and-on cord.
Yeah. It is a pulling of the and-on cord. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm curious. So I've seen the same thing within my own work and talking to other people is there does have to be a certain amount of like you said, stop the work. The challenge to that, now you're 6 people, but you guys are going 1,000,000 miles an hour because you're in startup mode.
Yeah, we're now up to 12.
Yeah, okay. So there you go.
We are on the 21st of April here.
But yeah, I find there's an interesting, I don't know, I feel like it's almost like a spectrum, but it shouldn't be a spectrum where you're going to have people who kind of treat it as if it's, okay, well, maybe this, the learning of this, the learning of how to get better at it could be like a 20% project, like Google used to have. But I think what you're sort of saying is like, if you treat it like that, you're not sort of a fifth of the way behind, like the gap will continue to expand quite a bit.
And eventually you'll be infinity behind. So that's the other thing, is to be able to frame the moment, not just by declaring a stop, but also to make grounded but bold statements. So I offered the team 2 bold statements, which I think now are kind of obvious. One was, I believe that we're within about 6 months as an industry of engineers not writing code. We take ourselves pretty seriously. We're proud of our engineering culture. So much of the common wisdom about what developers do, right, is we code. Yeah. But what if no? Right. What if it wasn't? How would we redefine the developer job? So again, simple, bold statements help people pay attention. And then I followed it by saying, I think we're within about 12 months of developers no longer reading code.
In terms of,
so now you've got kind of the bookends, right? Like you're not writing it and you're not reviewing it. You're actually not touching the code surface at all in any way.
Right.
A year from now, is that possible? Well, whether or not it's possible, I've just created the possibility. I've created the space for you to think about it.
Yeah.
Now we can start to really retool. Right. You got to do the first move. You got to halt. And then you can retool and say, okay, we're going to do this as a team. We're going to take this seriously. We're going to start with a beginner's mind. Actually started the day with a short breath meditation, just 30 seconds. Amazing how much attention and peace you can create for yourself in 30 seconds. And then we got into it.
Yeah. Have you yet been able to sort of measure the difference between, that stop moment and sort of where you are now in terms of anything, any sort of metric or measurement or direction that you think of as significant?
It's been really simple, actually. So part of that moment is that we all worked on projects that we already had in mind, but hadn't gotten around to. Because it's nice to have, I won't call it a toy project, but I'll call it a pet project, something you really wanted to do. But you just, in startup land or in any kind of engineering life, right, you've got a set of things that you absolutely have to get done, and then you've got your wish list. So we all pulled wish list items. That was kind of the reward for engaging with the process. And we all learned how Francisco coded. So, of course, one of the things I coded was a developer productivity dashboard, right? Just hooked all the GitHub APIs, created a Git workflow, and automatically runs, a set of analytics on our most active repos, and then looks at, every one of us, how many lines of code are we building? Are we adding? How many lines of code are we removing? What's that total code flux? How long are the PRs open? What's happening with those PRs? Are they getting merged? Are they turning into code rot? What we saw over the last 8 weeks, I guess it's been since we did that, maybe 7. Our code velocity is up about 3x. our bit rot is down. It's down close to zero now. I measure bit rot in a very particular way, which is, how many lines of code have you put into a PR that have not made it to main in 28 days?
Okay.
Because it's an important way of thinking about it in an agentic world, right? That might be okay in a pre-agent engineering team, but really I should probably tighten bit rot and make that definition like 14 days. If you're actually that many days off of main, it's like being months off of main in the old world. So we've seen that everyone has been increasing code velocity, increasing merge percentage, decreasing code rot, and we can see it in just the feature velocity. And I'm not talking about like agile Kanban feature points, all those things can be gained.
Right.
But we can just see how fast the system is improving, how fast we are able to add features, change how it behaves, and the delight that we see with our customers as they say, on a Monday, hey, I'd like it to work like this. And then we deploy and we show them on a Tuesday and they're like, wow, where's that running? We're like, it's in your production system. Like,
right.
I don't know how you move this fast. And our response is like, well, we're happy to teach you, right? The differentiation for us is not going to be that we can do better harness engineering and we're at the agent native coding frontier forever. It's going to go back to like plain old engineering work of being really good at the domain, understanding what makes the hard problems hard, and having all that information modeled in your own bespoke harness.
Yeah.
So that agents generally get nudged to do the right thing.
Yeah. No, and I think a couple of things that I was thinking about as this goes along. So are you seeing this? Obviously you're out on the West Coast, you're around both the Seattle and the Silicon Valley scenes that are driving so much of this. Are you seeing this kind of become the norm with every, Series A, Series B level startup at this point? Like there is no other way to compete, or do you find that that's still people are still in that learning curve stage?
I think I don't hang out with as many Series B founders as I do seed and A, because that's just where we are in the life cycle. Everybody's on board. Like I don't know anybody who in April doesn't have their team pointed at token maxing. And if you're not familiar with token maxing, the term you can search for is TOKENMAXXING, all one word. So, a little cringy, but like you can think of token usage like your VO2 max. Everybody's got their own target range that you can drive your personal fitness at. And it varies by body type, it varies by your genetics, it varies by your age. But VO2 max is not about competing with somebody else's VO2 max, right? You're all trying to do a better half marathon time. Or you're trying to get over the mountain on your mountain bike, and you can feel the difference when you're fitter. So rather than making it a team-wide performance metric, I think everybody is snapping to this idea of let's just measure the raw count of tokens that every developer is using, and let's let them look at these and assess, am I using enough tokens? So that's when you know that the state has changed. We're no longer like, be thoughtful about the token usage. Let's make sure that we're being really efficient. It's flipped upside down where it's like if you aren't driving up your token usage, it probably means you're being inefficient in the meta. Because in order to have really high token usage, you have to have a very elegant mind. And that mind has to be fitted to a harness that reflects it. And those things have to continue to be in evolution and in some kind of balance, because you're effectively moving more and more of your cognitive background of obviousness into your harness. The next step that I'm seeing is that people are building knowledge bases that are at least agent native, if not agent first, where you're documenting everything that's true about your customer, or everything that's true about your product strategy, or everything that's true about the user experience research that you've done, and putting all that in Markdown in a repo and exposing that to your coding agents so that they can start to nudge themselves in the right direction. Yeah. It's kind of obvious that you would do that for like your architectural principles, your data schema, right? All that stuff that you might teach a developer, junior, mid-level, or senior who's coming into the firm. Now we're documenting all of that in Markdown, making sure the agent can see that. This next phase that I'm describing is more of the meta company knowledge about like, why do we do these things? What do these customers want? What do they feel like? Just like you might want like an outstanding engineer is not only aware of the code, but they're aware of some of the whys, right? What's the why of the product?
We were talking about this before we started recording. You mentioned in there, this idea that that the model is really no longer your bottleneck, but the harness is, and the things that you're doing and learning about this idea of sort of harness engineering. Can you kind of give an overview of what that means? Where the tools stop, where the harness begins, and then kind of how you've had to learn what the harness can do and how it drives what you're doing.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the seminal blog post on this was OpenAI's harness engineering post, where they grabbed all of our attention by saying, hey, we've got 1 million lines of code and 0 human written code.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what we're using to write our production software at OpenAI. That was kind of mind-boggling. What is the harness? The harness is everything between you using raw Claude code and saying, write me some code that does this, and giving it specific guidance, and it being likely to get it exactly right the very first time. So if you start to look at it from that point of view, and I like how you brought in Gene Kim in the beginning, right? It's really a lean engineering approach. How many stations? What's your talked time effectively of a feature? From the point that you have the idea for the feature to that feature's in production, how can you minimize that? That's the goal of harness engineering. So every single time you have to do rework, every time the agent makes an error, every time it hits a bad command, it could be as simple as it used the wrong GitHub command in order to commit some code. Every single step along that way that slows it down, makes a misstep, that's friction.
Yeah.
And so the art of harness engineering is understanding your own SDLC, what you're trying to produce. And every single time that the agent gets something wrong, having the patience to record it, and then having the patience to put as much time into improving the harness so that your velocity increases, perhaps as you put in building the feature. If it tends to make mistakes, then you can even ask it to reflect on why it made that mistake. This is one of the very interesting things that I'll offer from the lens of a cognitive scientist. There is some accurate reflectivity built into these models. They can see their own logs, right? They can see their own context windows. And if you say, that's interesting. You made the same mistake around the test framework and writing the test script for this like 3 times until you persisted and got it on the 4th. Why was that? And what would have to be true in order for you to get it right the first time? I found that asking it how the ergonomics could be improved for the agent, and that we'd like to help the next agent have a perfect experience, has been incredibly useful in getting the agent to collaborate in generating the right harness. And what you can see is actually, ironically, reduced token usage because it's not taking false steps, reduced wall time, and supervision. And this is really the key to a great harness, is that, to quote Spaceballs, like, you advance to ludicrous speed and you go plaid.
Yeah.
What does plaid look like? This is what Francisco showed us at the end of February. And I think we've only improved our performance since then.
Yeah, no,
virtual desktops. Each virtual desktop working on a different work tree. Mm-hmm. And in each work tree, 3 to 8 agents working on parallel tasks in the work tree. So it's a little bit more like watching somebody playing like competition StarCraft. Like, what's your actions per minute? It's a completely different flow of work. And right. That's why I say it takes an elegant mind, because you have to be able to track what are the things that I'd like to do? How are they independent of each other? And can I get them to work in work trees? How are they dependent on each other? Okay, that's going to be work on one work tree. And then how can I parallelize that work safely by having multiple agents either researching, critiquing the plans, writing the test plans, doing the coding. So it's a completely different world where now you're constantly conducting through your harness an orchestra of anywhere between, let's call it, 9 and 30 agents that are working on your stuff. It's also can be tiring.
Oh, sure.
A lot of decision making and a lot of creativity.
Well, I mean, yeah, when you think about just a regular day, the days that you're the most exhausted, at least from a knowledge worker perspective, are the ones where you're constantly context switching, you're constantly being asked to make decisions all the time. You don't, that'll create a strain on you.
Yeah. And if you have to make dumb decisions, right? If you have to make low-level decisions where you're just guiding the agent to get over the next hump, then you're never going to get to like something closer to a flow state. So that's right. Where the discipline of observing the friction, keeping an explicit friction log, and even tagging, right? Like in your GitHub PRs, explicitly saying, "Oh, this is a chore, but it's not like a chore for DevX. It's a chore for the harness. There's a feature for the harness. There's a fix for the harness."
Right.
So you start splitting out that sense of maybe I've always got one agent in each work tree that's just collecting the harness issues. And I'm going to make sure that once I finish my content, I'm going to update the harness, but elevate it into a first class stream of work and recognize that as valuable among the team.
Yeah.
Right. Who's contributed most to all of our shared fitness this week, right? It's whoever's identified like a clever way to get through a piece of friction that nobody else could figure out how to do or took the time to do, but was biting all of us.
Yeah. You talk about this idea, and I've heard this a number of times now, the idea of sort of engineers, software engineers becoming more portfolio managers of agent-driven work. You were sort of talking about that.
Yeah.
Are people within your team, are people starting to sort of grasp that concept? Do they sort of, if they started to, I don't want to say disconnect themselves from the sort of typing part of software development, but like, are they starting to embrace that idea of, I have this capability to let a bunch of things go off and do stuff and I'm coordinating them? Or is that, obviously it's been a short period of time. How is that evolution taking place?
Yeah, so there's been three shifts. One is being very intentional about the specification it's always been important, right?
Sure.
But now it's become spectacularly important. And if you half-ass it and expect full credit, you'll pay for it all week because you'll keep retuning the agent and the portfolio is just not going to progress.
Yeah, you could do sloppy code and it fails some tests. I mean, you're now doing, if you're not doing the spec well, you're doing 30x sloppy code or 9x sloppy code, that type of thing, I can imagine. So yeah.
Yeah. So we've really elevated the importance of getting the spec right, which includes improving the importance of spec review and spec contribution, spec iteration. So as one example, we built a brand new production SLO system in 6 days. It was 5 days of defining SLOs, SLO theory, SLO practice, making sure that we're applying this properly to the problem that we've got. We had 3 people who have different levels of pretty deep expertise in it, and then 1 developer who had no prior experience in this at all.
Yeah.
And so that developer led the process, responded to all of the feedback, iterated, improved. In the downtime, worked on a few other features, and then called it a week at the end of Friday. From Monday morning to Monday night, the entire production SLO system was built and pushed. And by the next morning, we had all the telemetry and traces. So this is what I mean when I say, like, you may say that you're using Claude code and it's installed, but are you actually able to operate at 50x speed? Nobody in their right mind would say that you can build a production SLO system, that you can engineer it and get it into operation and see the traces and have everything work in a day. It hides, right, the spec work, which is why I wanted to start by elevating spec work.
Right.
The second thing is this sense of portfolio management. It's almost more like driving multiple cars. Right, it's kind of fun.
Sure.
Back in the early days of MMOs, there were some games that they hadn't really gotten the class balance quite right. Like there were support classes. I think of Dark Age of Camelot, which they had a Bard class. Now the Bard had like 2 things that you couldn't live without. They could heal you in combat, and they made you run faster through the world. And if you know about MMOs, moving through the world is something you do a lot of. But they weren't very good at anything else. So I ran what was called 2-boxing, right? I had 2 accounts. I had 1 computer, which was my bard, who was just following my main character, who was actually part of the party. And everybody was always happy, right? Because nobody had to play the bard. So there's a lot of split attention going in. You have a result that you want. You're aligning it to your overall desire, and you're guiding all of these agentic engineers. So I don't think of it quite like portfolio management, because I feel like, yes, there's some tuning in portfolio management. There's an outcome that you can measure super, super precisely if you're in finance. But it feels to me, not being a finance professional, a little more passive. Whereas this shift that I've seen the team go through to put their attention on multiple things, all leading up to one big result that they want to have in that day, it's very front-footed, making sure that the guidance is right. The last thing that's changed is, you mentioned typing. Right? What are we typing? Are you still typing code? A lot of us are starting to use whisper flow because it's so much faster to just talk to the harness, right? Very fluid. Whisper flow has done extraordinary things for our productivity because it just tends to get things right. It also knows if you're talking to Claude Code, or if you're talking to Google Docs, or if you're talking to Notion, or if you're in VS Code. So I think we've even seen more use of raw terminal-based development, just running the Claude Code REPL in a terminal, than using it attached to the IDE all the time.
Yeah.
So those are the things, right? Spec centricity, right? The power of design, this shift to, a multi-boxing kind of approach to guide the agents to where you want to get. And then finally this shift to being able to talk to your agents, right? The voice-driven capability is amazing.
Yeah.
The net of that is like our brand new product designer who's never coded in their life before is shipping production features, which is the best thing that I could possibly say about this system, right? Everybody at Sailplane is able to contribute.
Yeah, no, that I was gonna ask you about that, and I may save it for a different show. Was, now that you're probably, as you guys grow and you're getting closer to bringing things into the marketplace, you're going to start dealing with folks who aren't, sort of developers by nature, whether they're in marketing or some other activity, but they're going to be interacting with you guys. I'll be very curious to see how the velocities match up, the tool sets match up, and so forth, because I think there's going to be some overlap in that. I've seen that myself, but I want to ask you one last question because we're going to kind of bump up against time here. You've obviously been at, larger companies, you've been at smaller companies, you've seen sort of the dynamic that happens when companies that have some installed base and then the startup comes along and starts sort of nipping at their heels. If, you're now sort of living from the startup's perspective, but you're doing it now at this sort of much faster velocity. If you were sitting down with somebody who was, running one of the companies that at some point you guys will compete against, or, is just sort of incumbent in some space.
Yes.
Like, how would you sort of describe it to them? But don't give me the super, gregarious kind of, I'm looking for funding. But I mean, how would you put this, knowing that you've sort of sat on both sides of the fence, what this new velocity looks like? And I ask this because I know we have tons of people that listen to the show that are at jobs at which, they're at companies that have market share and establishedness, but they're kind of looking at this going, how serious do I have to take this? Not so much how serious, but like, how fast do I have to adapt to this?
Yeah, I believe that the safest place in the tech economy right now is in small startups. I think being in a big company is actually pretty risky, right? There's all this retooling and reassessment of what are we paying people for, and there's a lot of fog of war as leadership is trying to figure out what do you do with your dollars, what do you do with that to influence your revenue, how do you improve your margins, and we've seen a colossal number of layoffs from big companies in the last couple of years, and it seems like we're going to see more because cutting jobs is seen now as a forcing function to somehow inspire creativity. But the biggest risk for people at big companies is that you get paid to work on last year's problems using last year's techniques, which means you're accelerating backwards. You're getting better at what's not actually relevant. So how seriously should you take it? You should quit your job if you're not getting paid literally to advance yourself and your team to the frontier of agent native coding.
Yeah.
You will be safer in the long run if you do that. Because if you are doing this like there's not a moment to lose, like your life depends on it, then when you've got this experience, when you've come through 6 months or a year or 2 years, and the economy shakes itself out further, all of your experience, all of your leadership, plus your courage, plus your new frontier level agent native coding skills are going to make you the obvious choice for next team leader, next executive, whatever the economy looks like if you want to go back into a big company.
Yeah.
The people I speak with in big companies are feeling a certain amount of anxiety, a certain amount of stress, right? That's just kind of native to being in those political environments. But one of the biggest fears is like, how are you all moving so fast? And how are we going to remain relevant? So,
Right.
Yeah, you should take it deeply seriously, but also joyfully, because if you quit your job and make your own, you'll have more fun every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff, Sam. I always appreciate the time. You are always sort of solving big problems with a big smile on your face, which is a rare combination that I always appreciate. Thank you for the time. We're going to have you back when the time is right to dig into Sailplane more at a public level. But I appreciate you sharing, just the learning curve you guys have had and the learnings that you're taking forward and the framing of it. So thank you very much for the time. Folks, for that, I'm going to wrap it up. Great to have Sam on. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. If you get a chance to go out and rate the show in all the places you get your podcast, we'd appreciate that. So with that, we'll wrap it up and we will talk to you next time.
Check us out online at reasoning.show for all things reasoning. and leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to the show.